I used to hear a simple explanation for all the violence in the Bible, that the nations were wicked and God was judging them. And once we accept that premise, we can tolerate almost anything the text throws at us. But I kept reading, and something doesn't add up. If the reason for genocide was to remove sin from the land, why do the very people swinging the sword commit the same sins? Why does the judgment never start at home? And this is where the story starts to unravel. God rescues Israel from Egypt. They march out as a freed slaves, chosen to be a holy nation. That's the promise. It becomes their identity. But immediately the idea appears that their holiness is defined by other people's destruction. And before they even reach the promised land, God lays down the mission. In Deuteronomy chapter 20, verse 16 and 17, do not leave alive anything that breathes. Completely destroy them, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, as the Lord your God has commanded you. There's no wiggle room. No, just the soldiers. No, only those who attack you. Nope, everything that breathes. The justification we see in Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 5. It is because of the wickedness of these nations that the Lord your God is driving them out. All right then, if the whole thing is about wickedness, let's track the wickedness. The first major accusation is idolatry. Foreign gods, pagan worship, rituals under sacred trees and on high hills. That's the reason the land is violently cleaned out, at least so the story goes. But what happens the minute Israel gets any breathing room? In Exodus chapter 32, we see golden calf. Before the tablets even cool, they're worshiping something else, and it keeps happening. In Judges chapter 2, verse 11 and 13, the Israelites did evil. They served the Baals. They followed and worshiped other gods. The very thing that supposedly doomed the Canaanites, Israel does constantly, but the genocide commands continue. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 2, make no treaty with them and show them no mercy. Then comes one of the darkest moments in the whole Torah, Numbers chapter 31, the Midianites. In verse 17 and 18, kill every male among the little ones, and kill every woman who has known a man, but keep alive for yourselves all the young girls. This isn't just war. This isn't self-defense. It's sexual slavery written as a divine order. The reason again, because Midian led Israel into idolatry and sexual sin. We see it in Numbers chapter 25. But let's hold that up for a second. Israel doesn't get seduced into something they weren't already willing to do. Israel is already fully engaged in the same behavior. In 1 Kings chapter 14, verse 22 through 24, Judah did evil. They set up sacred stones and Asherah poles on every high hill and under every spreading tree. They practiced all the detestable things the nations the Lord had driven out. So who's the corrupting influence here? The next charge is child sacrifice. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 31, they burn their sons and daughters in the fire. God says that's why the land vomits these people out. And yet in 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 17, they sacrifice their sons and daughters in the fire. Same book, same condemnation, different people holding the knife. And it gets worse. In Jeremiah chapter 19, verse 4 and 5, they have filled this place with the blood of the innocent. They built the high places of Baal to burn their children in the fire, something I did not command. The very act that supposedly justified slaughtering others, Israel does it too, repeatedly. Next is sexual immorality. Same pattern. And Leviticus 18 says the Canaanites were driven out for sexual sin. So if that's the standard, Israel should be held to that same one. But the prophets accuse Israel of doing the exact same acts. In Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 11, one commits abomination with his neighbor's wife, another lewdly defiles his daughter-in-law, another violates his own sister. These are three direct violations from that exact list in Leviticus 18 that supposedly justified annihilating Canaan. In Jeremiah chapter 5, verse 7 and 8, we see, when I fed them to the full, they committed adultery and thronged to the houses of prostitutes. They were well-fed, lusty stallions, each neighing after another man's wife. Then in 2 Kings chapter 23, verse 7, he broke down the houses of the male cult prostitutes who were in the house of the Lord. Not just sexual immorality, ritual prostitution inside the temple courts. In Hosea chapter 4, verse 13 through 14, your daughters play the whore, and your daughters-in-law commit adultery. The men themselves go aside with prostitutes and sacrifice with cult prostitutes. The exact same behavior that supposedly justified wiping out other people. And then the most graphic moment in the Hebrew Bible when it comes to this is Ezekiel chapter 23, verse 19 and 20. She increased her whoring, lusted after her lovers there, whose members were like those of donkeys, and whose emission was like that of stallions. This isn't a theological metaphor. It is explicit because the acts themselves were explicit. Sexual immorality wasn't just an outsider problem. The behavior we use to justify Israel committing genocide is the same behavior Israel didn't stop committing. Another reason for the conquest is violence and injustice. But listen to Isaiah chapter 1. Your hands are full of blood. Seek justice. Stop doing wrong. Yahweh's chosen ones are called murderers. The sword they yield comes right back at them. And at this point, the moral framework the Bible claims, the good guys against the wicked, it's just gone. There's no clean separation. Even God says it outright in Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 12, you have done more evil than your ancestors. In Ezekiel chapter 5, verse 7, you have been more unrighteous than the nations around you. The whole premise collapses. If genocide is justice for wickedness, Israel qualifies for their own annihilation 10 times over. The historical arc keeps going anyway. We get into Joshua. He enters the land. Cities are wiped out. Jericho, Ai. In Joshua chapter 10, verse 40, he left no survivors. He totally destroyed all who breathed. And the reason? Same justification. Joshua chapter 23, verse 16, you will perish from this good land because you went and served other gods. They know the rule. They break the rule. Yet only the foreigners pay with extinction. Then Judges hits. Israel spirals. Idol worship. Every other chapter, God hands them over to the enemies, but never commands Israel to be exterminated the same way Israel exterminates others. Sword for thee, mercy for me. How convenient. By the time we reach Kings, it's a full collapse into the same sin that wipes out the nations before them. 2 Kings chapter 21, verse 6, Manasseh sacrifices his own son in the fire, practiced divination and witchcraft. This is the king of Judah. Let's take a breath and try to remember the logic we were given in Sunday school. Canaanites were too wicked to exist, and their actions justified their destruction. So what do we do when Israel does everything that they did? There's no satisfying answer, just shifting blame and excuses. And then come the prophets. They don't soften it. You only have I chosen, therefore I will punish you for all your sins. Ezekiel 16 is scathing. Israel is compared to Sodom and then to Samaria and told she is worse than both. In verse 51, you have made your sisters seem righteous by all these things you have done. So the standard that justified genocide has now condemned the very people who did the killing. And yet no command ever comes down to destroy Israel with the same totality Israel unleashed on the nations around them. The inconsistency in the text is obvious. If genocide was justice, the justice is never applied consistently. If wickedness is the reason for death, the wickedness isn't what decides who dies. Something else is driving this, whether that be power or tribal loyalty or a narrative of chosenness. You can't unsee it once you see it. Because the genocides themselves weren't any type of righteous crusade. They were political expansion wrapped in God's language. The text itself admits the danger of the narrative. In Deuteronomy chapter 9, verse 4, do not say in your heart, it is because of my righteousness that the Lord has brought me in to possess this land. But that's exactly what the tradition did, and it still does. If we strip away the excuses, the story becomes painfully simple. It wasn't that the Canaanites were uniquely wicked. It was that they were in the way. The whole moral structure collapses the moment you realize the sword wasn't swung to remove sin, it was swung to remove people. It wasn't that Israel sinned less, it was that Israel told the story. When the victors write the narrative, their violence becomes holy, their crimes become judgment, their enemies become immoral, and God becomes the mascot of the winning side. I grew up believing that genocide in the Bible was justified, that God had a plan, he was sovereign, that the people he killed deserved it. But then I saw the pattern. I saw the hypocrisy written right into the text itself. I saw the prophets point the finger back at their own people, and they didn't even flinch. When the truth is uncomfortable, silence becomes a strategy. And the story confronts us. Either God demanded the slaughter of nations for sins his own people committed constantly, which makes God's justice arbitrary, or the genocides weren't God at all, just human violence dressed up in God's language. Those are the options that the text gives us. There's no third path where genocide becomes righteous again. All the excuses fall apart inside the narrative itself. And I think we're forced to choose. Do we protect the idea, or do we face the reality? If righteousness is what determines who lives, then Israel should not have lived. If sin is what brings death, Israel should have been wiped out long before the Canaanites. I have a question, and I ask you not to push it away. If genocide is justice for the wickedness, why spare the ones who do the killing? What makes their children more precious than the children they killed? What makes their idolatry different than the idols their neighbors worshipped? What makes their blood more valuable? The Bible doesn't give any satisfying answers for this. The morality collapses under its own weight. We're left staring at a story where power decides who dies, and righteousness is awarded only to the survivors, the people who wrote the book. People were trying to make sense of the world they lived in. They're trying to make sense of a God they believed in. And when the only stories we get to hear are from the victors, I think we need to put that on the table as a piece of the evidence that we need to consider when validating the truth claims of the people giving the message. Thanks for tuning in, staying this long. If you found value, if you enjoyed the video, please like, share, subscribe, all those things that really help the channel. I'd greatly appreciate it, help get the message out. But yeah, thank you so much for your time. As always, keep peeling and be blessed.